Why does democracy need the church? Why would we need 300,000 people and 1,000 churches mobilized to defend democracy, defeat injustice, and build durable collective power? That's what we're here to talk about today on a very special episode of the Justice Briefing. I'm your host, Dr. Jemar Tisby, and this is your weekly dose of current events at the intersection of faith, history, and justice. I mentioned a moment ago that this is a special episode. That's because we have a guest. Usually you're used to just seeing me, but this time we have with us the Reverend Michael McBride. Welcome to the Justice Briefing.
Dr. Tisby, great to be with you, good brother, and glad to see you have this platform. It's such a blessing.
Listen, for folks who don't know, you're listening to a living legend here.
Oh,
Reverend McBride is the executive director of Live Free USA, a national network advancing public safety, ending mass incarceration, and reducing gun violence. As a nationally recognized faith leader, he's advised the Obama administration. He's helped drive initiatives linked to significant reductions in gun violence. So his work actually works. And he co-founded the Black Church PAC and the Black Brown Peace Consortium. He also serves as lead pastor of The Way Church in Berkeley, California, and he's a frequent contributor to major media outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, and CNN. We're so glad that you could join us for this conversation. First things first, we are just coming off the Oscars, and congratulations to your fellow Oaklander, Ryan Coogler, on his
yeah.
Oscar win and all the success of the Sinners movie. How did you react and respond to all that?
I mean, it was nerve wracking to say the least. Some of us feel like Coog should have got Oscar maybe a couple years ago, but to see him be the first, black director to get a cinematography award, we were hoping for Best Picture and Best Director, but Best Score, Best Cinematography, I
Best
believe
actor.
the Best Actor, and then I think the sound engineer won as well. So it
Yeah,
was
original screenplay. Yeah,
original screenplay. That's
screenwriting.
what
Yeah.
original screenplay. Yeah. So I'm grateful and I'm happy for Ryan. We've known each other for probably going on about 20 years or so. And me and his mom worked together.
Oh,
And she
wow.
introduced me to Ryan during my Pico Faith in Action days. And we've stayed, relatively close and, serve as a bit of a spiritual advisor and prayer partner and, support for him and his family. And so just grateful, man. Super excited for him and Zinzi, who is the dynamo pair, if you will.
Yeah.
So it was a good day. Good day for Oakland. Good day for Black people. Just a good day all around.
What are they like in real life? I'm sorry. I'm just fanning out here.
Everyday,
Because
everyday people. They everyday people,
okay.
bro. Like
Okay.
uh, Ryan is a very down to earth guy. He, may even describe himself sometimes a little shy. So he just comes out of this kind of real heightened consciousness, and just a great dude, man. I mean, they just everyday people, and they are obviously not just very talented, but very conscious. So
Yeah.
super excited and grateful. No nicer guy than Ryan. No nicer sister than Zinzi. They're very, very dope people, and it couldn't happen to anybody better.
Well, it sure seems that way. I put on social media that we'll talk about his directing and their producing for generations to come. What intrigues me even more about the Kuglers and Ryan in particular is his leadership. His
Mm-hmm.
leadership skills. Seem like everybody who works with him just raves about the experience, feels
Yeah.
affirmed as an artist, but also as a human being. And that's
Mm-hmm.
difficult to pull off, especially on these super large, multi-million dollar projects. And so we're just so excited for him.
Yeah,
I've been talking.
like it's worth saying,
Yeah.
back during the you know early stages of say the Ferguson uprising and all of the movement work happening, Ryan helped to gather this whole network of artists, storytellers, activists, and it was called the Blackout for Human Rights.
Mm.
And we would host these events on MLK Day at the Riverside Church to try to keep alive the legacy of Dr. King. We went to Flint, Michigan during the water crisis and did a bunch of work there. So he has been, you talk about leadership, right? Like he has been someone who has not only been convening people, talent, and activists and organizers, not just to make film, but to actually have an impact on our people. And he does it in the background. He never is looking for limelight or celebration, but his leadership has been so transformative to all of us that know him. And so, yes, he's a great filmmaker, but he is like a everyday cares about our people, the conditions of our people, and has proven that over the last 15, 20 years for sure. So so just yeah, keep praying for him and them. Obviously they're making a lot of moves, and I believe it will only go up from here.
That's wonderful to hear. I mean, we don't put anybody on a pedestal. Everybody's got clay feet, but it is really, really encouraging to hear that the people who you perceive as just good-hearted, kind people are actually that way in real life based on the testimony of folks like you who actually know them. So
Yeah,
thank you
right.
for indulging me, brother. This is
That's not good.
not the goal of the conversation, but I was like, we can't let this moment pass to hear from somebody who knows them directly. So, but let's talk about you. You're an activist, you're an organizer, you're a pastor, and we've been talking essentially about current events with the Oscars, but there's also much weightier stuff going on.
Mm.
And I'm just curious about like what's in the headlines right now that you're paying attention to and that we should be paying attention to. Obviously, we'll talk about Love Free in a moment, but just like what's happening right now that you're paying particularly close attention to.
Well, I think this war in Iran is it's a terrible development for the world. I think it is so tragic to see that arguably the religious, political fundamentalists of the three monotheistic religions have brought the world to the brink of nuclear disaster.
Wow.
And the kind of religious fundamentalism that is in our country vis-a-vis the Christian authoritarianism, the kind of religious fundamentalism that is codified through the leadership and the foreign policy of Netanyahu in Israel, the kind of religious fundamentalism that's at work in parts of the Islamic world, all of it together, I think, is converging to create a terrible, terrible reality for so many people in the world who are living below the poverty line. And
Mm.
so just today, we're seeing that they may be trying to bring a $200 billion supplemental war funding bill to the Congress. Last week it was $50 billion, and we started to put out some sign-on letters to try to get as many people to call your senators and Congress members to reject the $50 billion. And just this morning we see it's been raised to $200 billion. They're burning the natural gas fields, or bombing and burning the gas fields and the oil fields, which is going to have a terrible consequence on the global energy conditions, which will make the economy even more devastating for so many of us. So this war in Iran is a war of choice. Many of us think that it is a war designed to keep the attention off the pedophiles and cannibalists
Mm.
in the Epstein files that we certainly believe the highest political leaders of our country and perhaps a few other countries are in. Just the cavalier nature of us going to war is, to me, I think that what should be one of the most number one issues that we are talking about, because I can't believe and understand how we who claim to follow the Prince of Peace can just be so comfortable with never-ending wars, particularly in the um, you know Middle East, where so much of our faith has its roots and origins.
My goodness. When you said the fundamentalists of the three
Mm,
monotheistic religions, the major
yeah.
monotheists, that hit different.
Mm,
That hit different. How
mm.
did you put that together? Has that always been on your radar? That framing, I think, is really significant and important for us.
Well, I've always been interested how here in the United States we've only really described religious fundamentalism, or say radical Islamists. We have this caricature. One could argue it's Islamophobic in nature, where we really only see, you know, um, Islam as this kind of radical religion of Middle Eastern countries who just for no reason just hate America, and they're just using all these military actions. But we rarely see or acknowledge that there's a certain form of American Christian fundamentalism as well that has now emerged so publicly, where you're hearing reports of Hegsteth and generals telling the soldiers that they're fighting this war to hasten Armageddon and the coming of Jesus. Like, that is being talked about openly by generals to soldiers as they're initiating these military excursions into other countries. And then obviously Netanyahu is the most charitable account of Israel today, is they want to marginalize Netanyahu and his administration as being, these extremists as well. And so knowing, in my interfaith work that we are supposed to, in the religious context, supposed to be, sister religions. We all, have a monotheistic sensibility, but yet we are waging war in a way that literally is bringing us to the brink of disaster. I don't know. It's something that's just been sitting on me the last year or so, and it makes me interrogate my own faith and tradition and practice, because it is a betrayal for sure.
Yeah, because each of these religions also has some version of loving your neighbor, treating people a certain way, and
Or
yet,
even just war theory. Like, if you want to
right,
go down
yeah,
into this deeply theological kind of obviously we all share similar text, or have parallel or adjacent concepts of the prophets, of the teachings. But there is this also, I think, shared sensibility around what does it mean to enter into a just war. And one could argue we are all betraying these
100%.
sensibilities. And it's worth saying that the kind of corporate greed, the kind of oligarchies, the kind of monopolies on the minerals of the earth, the mechanisms of financing in the world,
Mm,
like, those things are probably even more of a catalyst for these never-ending wars. But the fact that our faiths can so easily be manipulated to get the masses of people who have little to attach our kind of consent to it through a theological or moral or political stance, it should make us all shudder and ask deep questions about the efficacy of our formation and discipleship in the 21st century.
good Lord. Yeah, and I will point our listeners and viewers to a previous Justice Briefing episode called Iran, Armageddon, and the End Times if you want to hear more about that. So, one of the reasons why your voice is so pivotal in this moment is because you're also a pastor. I mentioned before, you're an organizer, you're an activist, but you're also a pastor. And a lot of people think the church, and even the black church, is ineffective when it comes to fighting injustice and authoritarianism today. Some even think that the church is maybe more part of the problem than the solution. How do you respond to that?
Well, I am a critic of the church, particularly the black church, because I'm a part of our tradition. I love our tradition. I think we have to own that we have growing edges, and we have things that are worthy to be celebrated, remembered, and built upon. I want to just start by acknowledging the black church has been the longest uninterrupted anti-white supremacy freedom fighting institution in the United States of America. It's
Say that.
produced the greatest number of individuals clear about the the clear and present danger of human hierarchy, particularly racial hierarchy. It's produced prophets and organizers and reformists and revolutionaries that have helped to push the United States of America as far away as we've been in since the inception of this country from a kind of slave holding, constitutional republic democracy. And yet we still have to be honest and say that progress, quote unquote, whatever we want to define that as, has left us a bit drunk with the wine of this empire. It's so fascinating. We sing the Lift Every Voice and Sing song so frequently because it does warn us lest we become drunk, right? With this success, quote unquote, this association with power. So I do think it's really important for us to, remember rightly what the institution of the Black church has meant to this country, what it's meant to us as a people. We did not have the luxury to ignore racial injustice and human hierarchy. We did not have the luxury. I mean, our literal lives depended on it. If we ignored it, we would die. We would continue to be, 3/5 of a human being. So by necessity, the pressure of anti-Black racism, white supremacy, slave holding elites, the pressure of that forced us to hold and forge a prophetic practice of Black Christian faith. But now I think we are a bit falling susceptible to what Dr. King would call the triplets of evil, right? And I'm a do a little riff on this, right? Obviously he talked about racism, but I would expand that to othering. I think we are falling victim to othering through a very, I would say, small theological framework around moral vision and certainly moral attitudes and practices. Militarism, I think, obviously are not interrogating the $1 trillion war machine, but we are falling victim back again to tough on crime, which I say is militarism in cities across the country, and economic exploitation or poverty. I think we are a bit too caught up now with the materialism of this country. So I do think the Black church has to continue to wrestle with our legacy, to be honest about where we are, but to also appreciate that we do have assets. We do have lots of particular institutional power and theological force that we can unleash, unlock, and some of that will depend on our ability to integrate some of the more marginalized voices or less, centered voices that, in my mind, people who are impacted by the criminal justice system are women and children, our queer loved ones, folks who continue to find themselves at the bottom of the class dynamics in this country. If we can continue to lift every voice and sing and bring those voices into the center, I think we can recapture, dare I say, reclaim and unleash the legacy of the Black prophetic tradition that comes out of the Black church. I don't think we are the cause of it, this current Christian authoritarian takeover, but we could be doing more to ensure it's dismantled for sure.
And we will talk about what action looks like further on in this conversation. But I appreciate what you're saying, speaking as both you're speaking as both a scholar and a pastor, and you're saying it's both and. The Black church is both. This longest continuously running anti-white supremacist entity, and it may be drunk on the wine of the world, as
yes.
Lift Every Voice says, right? And even during what many people would consider the high watermark of Black church activism, the civil rights movement, it was still a minority of Black churches that were actively involved in the movement. And so this is not a departure from historical patterns. We're just living it in real time, and we're seeing the reality is a little bit different than we may have read about in the history books or heard in our classes.
Can I nuance that a little bit? Because I actually think it may have been a minority of Black Negro preachers supporting the civil rights movement.
Yes.
I do think the masses of Black people, if this institution has been our primary political home, we always vote for a liberation agenda. We march for a liberation agenda. we, take advantage of the liberation and freedom fighting opportunities as they present themselves. The preachers may be slow, and that is an unfortunate reality of just a kind of hierarchical, male centered leadership of black churches. But I want to argue that the people in black churches rarely wait for the preacher to catch up to a justice agenda. Sometimes they are out ahead and the preachers show up a little bit as they come along. But our institutions need to continue to show up well. And it starts out as a minority, but I would argue the people always find their way up to freedom's road.
That's a very great point. I wonder what you would say if my impression is correct that especially in the 21st century, and especially with younger generations, a lot of folks see the black church as maybe not evil, but irrelevant when it comes to injustice. They don't think it needs to be a particularly church centered movement, or they don't see churches or church leaders, however they parse it, as being actively involved. And I do agree that probably at the grassroots level, there's broad support for any sort of liberation agenda, politically, socially, culturally. So where would that impression, do you think, come from of people thinking that the church is not as active as perhaps the masses of Christians, their activity would indicate?
Well, and Reverend Dr. Breonna Parker were able to sponsor a study on the social impact of the black church. And I don't know if folks have had a chance to take a look at it, but it's a really, I think, important kind of survey of people's sensibilities towards the black church and what kind of impacts the black church has or does not have broadly in our society. I think that perception is reality. I think this is arguably one of the most important truths we have to tell ourselves, that historically the leadership of the black church is largely more conservative politically around issues of crime, issues of human sexuality, issues of perhaps gender, then it generally perhaps we show up when it comes to certain political fights. And again, I don't want to be too verbose on this point because obviously we have a lot of homophobia and sexism in the black church, pews, I would argue. But I think when it comes to like a political agenda, I think it's really important to just keep teasing out that 90% of the black people in this country vote on a ticket that does reach for the more progressive political gains in our country's history. And so there is something about us understanding when it comes to political engagement that in order for us to have the highest quality of life, we need rights readily available for as many people as possible. In our own personal lives, our theologies may become too rigid, fundamentalist, or myopic, where we're not able to meet that out, perhaps relationally or in our interactions with our neighbors. And I would just argue that to me is an American feature. Radical individualism is an American feature for how we interact with our neighbors, right? I want to hope there's something significant about our proximity to othering and oppression that keeps the large majority of black folks closer within the religious kind of sphere, closer to being much more open when pushed, when discipled, when agitated. It pushes us to have to interrogate the parts of our faith that keep us from being able to embrace as many people as possible, right? And I think it does not free us from the burden of this kind of duplicity that I think we have to acknowledge. But I also want to hope that it does give us this opportunity to continue to improve and be better. And that, what has agitated me, what has pushed me is having to pastor, LGBTQ folks, having to, advocate and work with younger people and people with criminal convictions. Me, myself being arrested and jailed and put in shackles albeit for social justice causes, but just this idea that, the proximity to that suffering does open up these important spaces for us to actually say, we will not comply with these most restrictive forms of human existence. And so I think people's sensibilities, people's perceptions are grounded in reality. I would not want to deny that that's real for folks. I would just want to offer, I think we see a both and even in this area as well. It's not lost on me that, the highest voters against these kind of, Christo-fascist expressions consistently have been Black Christians, right? So there's something about our ability to identify it at a political level. And then I think our formation and discipleship and our ethical praxis has to continue to interrogate it at an individual level. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what strikes me is, Pastor Mike, not many have pastors who have been arrested for social justice. Not many have pastors who are as socially and politically as engaged as you are. So let's just talk about your journey for a moment. We mentioned a moment ago, you're an Oakland guy, but tell us a bit more. How did you come to end up in this line of work and ministry?
Well, I'm actually from San Francisco. I'm exiled in Oakland because San Francisco is just a little too expensive, and Oakland's getting there. But yeah, I'm a Bay Area guy, born and raised here in the Bay Area. I actually am a fourth generation apostolic holiness Pentecostal. So that do clap our hands and run around and swing from the chandeliers. I say on a good day we levitate, right? So we that kind of church. I was beat up, physically and sexually assaulted by some police officers in 1999, March of 1999, while I was a youth pastor at Bible Way Christian Center in San Jose. I was a youth pastor in a Bible college, and two cops pulled me over, racially profiled, pulled me out the car, grabbed my groin in the course of the arrest, strip searched me, accusing me of having weapons and drugs. And that incident unlocked not just the kind of trauma of being a victim of police brutality, but it allowed me to have a different ear. So when I engaged with my young people, and they were telling me in our youth group, which had grown to about 60, 70 young people at the time, that Pastor Mike, this happens to me all the time. And I asked the young people, I said, why did you never bring this up to me? And this was a real formative moment for me. They said, we didn't believe the church would do anything about it. We know you love us, like you, Brother Mike, you are our youth pastor, but we just didn't think the church would deal with this. And I heard God speak to me in the midst of my own trauma and pain and say, what is it about the ministry you're building where these young people and their families will trust you with the stewardship and salvation of their souls, but not the safety of their bodies? And that began to form inside of me a ministry vision and call that was kind of about my own existential crisis that happened to me, but also this pain of the young people acknowledging they didn't believe the church would really respond, that I did not want to build the next 40 years of my ministry to just be about nickels, numbers, noises, and names, right? I want to still have all of those things in the service of ministry, but I did not want to be someone who would not be entrusted with the safety of the bodies of the people that God placed in my charge. And so I ended up going to Duke University for seminary, got great formation there, got introduced to Reverend Eugene Rivers, who was there visiting as a lecturer, and he introduced me to the Boston 10-Point Coalition work, got studied under Dr. Emmanuel Katangale, a Ugandan Catholic priest who taught me about the Rwanda genocide. Got a chance to study under Jay Carter and Willie Jennings and Dr. Turner, and met a whole host of friends. And so I feel like when I came home from seminary, I was speaking in another tongue. I was on fire.
Yeah.
And then I got really involved in my local organizing here, and can talk on and on and on about all the experiences around burying children, teenagers, going to the jails and courthouses. And I just continued to feel God was calling for more from me. I was trained formally as a theologian, to the extent that, you get a Master of Divinity from Duke, you do understand theological kind of formation. I was trained as an organizer. I got the Holy Ghost through the Pentecostal tradition. So I feel like there was literally nothing I could not do if God put it on my heart to do it. And I'm praying that I'm able to be faithful. But that trauma unlocked a journey for me that I'm still walking today.
Thank you for sharing that story. I know those, no matter how long it's been, it's still painful, but
Oh
you
yes. Mm-hmm.
clearly channeled it to prevent further harm to others. And what you're talking about here in terms of how you're channeling this into ministry, into discipleship, but also into public action, there's a field that I think that too many Christians ignore or they don't even know about, and it's called public theology. Some would call it political theology. How would you define that term and describe your approach to public theology?
So one of my favorite theological edicts that I think it was Aquinas who got it from Augustine, perhaps, it said, faith, um, faith seeking understanding. And then early on, I put on the end of that, for the purpose of praxis.
Ooh.
So I kind of made up this word in my seminary. I talked about, it's not about the right the orthodoxy, but it's also around orthopraxis, right? And I even wanted to say it's about theopraxis. How does your beliefs, your faiths, your ethics translate into your public relationships with other people, with systems, with creation? And so public theology or political theology, which again is a hallmark and a foundation for all of our theological traditions. If you studied Augustine, then you've studied a political theology. I mean, one could argue that the city of God is one of the foundations for Western political infrastructure. And so I have really made it a point to be intentional about not divorcing my faith from my kind of praxis, if you will. And I know a lot of people say and believe that they do that. And so I don't want to, try to hold a corner on something like it's so unique. But I do think we all can hold our personal convictions, and we all do. But we ought to ensure that our personal convictions, when put into the public square, unleashes human flourishing, right? And does not require the violence of the state in order to reinforce your personal convictions. And so theology is, I think, Dr. West or Michael Eric Dyson, justice is what theology looks like in the public. To me, that is a theopolitical, theological statement, if you will, right? It is important to, I love Walter Wink. If anyone's ever read Walter Wink, he has these wonderful 3 books, Naming the Powers, Disarming the Powers. Very important to ensure that political theology dismantles the oppressive, the diabolical, the hegemonic powers of the state and exposes them to be a lie, inferior to the human flourishing that we hope is found in the core beliefs of our tradition, that God is free. God wants us to be free. God is just. God wants us to be just. God is love. God wants us to be love. Right. And I think we have enough theological material, both in the patristics era, all the way to our current era, to tease that out if we're serious, disciplined, and a good faith partner in doing that.
See, that's why I like asking theologians about this question: public theology, political theology. Do you think, in terms of theopraxis, every pastor or faith leader needs to be an activist?
I think every pastor, every minister, every follower of Jesus needs to love justice, do mercy, and walk humbly with God. Now, what that looks like in our Live Free and Black Church kind of pack work, we often train social justice ministries to think of it in multiple ways. the work of mercy is to alleviate human suffering using the resources of either your congregation or of, partners, right? So poverty programs, and those are temporary fixes to permanent, enduring solutions. Then we talk about community development. Those are more permanent solutions to enduring problems. Then we talk about justice or political policy work. Those are systemic and structural solutions to enduring problems. So one is temporary, engagement, charity. One is community development, which attempts to provide a more permanent solution. And then one is about systemic and structural, which attempts to transform systems and, dare I say, create the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, again, through a justice lens. And so I think every follower of Jesus, whether you are a bishop, a pastor, an elder, a missionary, a lay member, every follower of Jesus should find a part of their discipleship process in one of these three categories: weekly, monthly. You should never go a week or a month without acting with charity to someone or weighing into meeting a need through a permanent kind of solution, housing or food programs, alleviation, or fighting the systemic and structural evils as they manifest themselves. So yes, activists, no. Justice lover, justice seeker, freedom fighter, yes, everybody should be one. And I think if you're not embracing that, then you're leaving a lot of your faith on the table.
I like the way you put that. Absolutely. Now, we've been talking about theology in its various forms and putting it into practice. And I've seen up close that you're a man of action. We got a lot of folks with a lot of words, and you're like, okay, great, but what do we do? Which I love about you. Um, who, how do you manage that tension between the urgent need to take action with the need for reflection, training, contemplation? I mean, we can think during the civil rights movement, like people didn't just all of a sudden jump on the streets and do a march. They had training,
Mm-hmm.
they had self-examination, they read books, they learned from elders. Like how do you navigate that tension between like stuff is happening now and we got to take action and we want to be informed when we do it and we want to be right within when we do
Yeah.
it.
Well, I'll try to break down like our organizing rhythm within Live Free as a kind of perhaps case study. Like we believe that all action should be grounded in real people and their lives. And in order to be grounded in people's lives, you have to listen. You have to be proximal to them. And so through our work, the way I've been trained as an organizer, we should be talking, you should be talking to, 10 to 15 new people every week.
Mm,
You should be having multiple conversations with people in your congregation, in your neighborhood, to learn their story, to hear their struggle. And over the course of months, that should build enough people where you're able to gather folks together and discern collectively on a particular act that you want to take to solve a common problem. You take that process then into the halls of decision makers, whether they be corporate, political, neighborhood, and you perform a public action, a public kind of accountability moment that holds the actors or the deciders responsible to enact the will of the people you've been talking to. That rhythm usually takes 6 to 9 months to kind of run through regularly. And for the last, say, 15 years of my life as both a pastor and an organizer, that has been a way for me to ensure that I always have urgency because I'm always in tune with what's happening in people's lives. And then I also have deliberation and intentionality where we just don't have to be reactionary to everything that's happening because we're always on a process of liberation and freedom and power building and base building. Now, those who know me know that, I'm always it down for a good fight. So, if something jumps off and I get a call and we can jump in and add value, we will. But even when the calls aren't coming, I'm proud that we always have dozens of organizers all across the country doing this painstaking work we have hundreds of people of faith joining in to be peacemakers and to be change agents, to rally and advocate and pray and intercede and heal. And then we have thousands of people that will take action with us, month to month, year over year. And so that sense of urgency is tempered or hopefully channeled through the relational work that we do. Personally, I would just say I've not been very good at that, balance. I was not able to, sustain and maintain, my marriage. So me and my, ex-wife were co-parenting two great girls. And I can attribute that not being able to kind of have that balance likely contributed to not being able to maintain that. But it's been a great lesson for me and hopefully for many others that, learning early the kind of rhythm of balance, like Jesus pulling away from the crowds to go pray. Like I used to preach and teach that and not always live into it as well as I could. And so something's got to give, right? And so being able to kind of just be honest and go through therapy and embrace your kind of challenges along the way with humility and courage and repentance and restoration, but not allow it to just cause you to like put on sackcloth and ashes and not stay active in the ministry and calling that God has asked you to do. So those rhythms to me, both internally and externally, I think are things that have held me together. I'm a big spiritual disciplines person. So, I really try to maintain the inner life as much as I can, especially when I fall short of some of my own kind of hopes and dreams.
I thank you for your transparency, Pastor Mike. I think that's going to liberate some people. I think that's going to inspire some people. And as we transition into the practical, let's just tackle it head on, the statement I made at the beginning of this conversation, and just ask you, why does democracy need the church? It's a small question.
Yeah. Well, I want to believe that that there's something really important about the moral vision of rightly formed followers of Jesus, and dare I say, practice people who practice any faith, that we are moving into an increasingly technocratic world, an increasingly material based world. And I think the ability to maintain a moral vision around care for the poor, the marginalized, conversations about peace and peacemaking and the consistent refrains around our vices. Like, I think all of that is an important part of democracy or of any kind of political system. And so we have an obligation to continue to bring that voice humbly but persistently into a political atmosphere that is reenacting the robber barons of the early 20th century that literally monopolized wealth and industry and created massive economic inequality that contributed to depressions and wars and massive human unemployment. And so I do believe that we have a responsibility, if no one else is talking about justice and peace and love and forgiveness and the practices of these kind of moral calls, then the church needs to infuse that humbly and nonviolently into every sense of stewardship of our world. And politics, political action, democracy is one form of stewardship. Just like you tithe, I believe voting is another stewardship, act of stewardship that we must bring into the world if we're going to be good stewards of creation.
I love the way you put that we can help provide that moral vision. And
Mm-hmm.
you've done interfaith work, so it's not saying that Christians have a monopoly on it or the church has a monopoly on it, but that
God, yeah,
yeah,
we'd be in trouble.
we'd be in big trouble. But it echoes. It reminds me of what King said, that the church shouldn't be the master of the state nor the servant
Yes,
of the state, but the conscience of the state.
conscience of the state. Yeah,
Yeah.
and just to add a little cone, too often we've been the chaplain
Mm,
of the American empire, right? And so it's super important for us to not forget our role.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
beautifully put. So you're wearing this beautiful sweatshirt. I gotta get me one. It says "Live
It's in the
Free,"
mail. Send me that.
and I pulled this from your website. It says, um, "Love free is how we take action together. Live free is the future we are building. Love free is how we take action together. Live free is the future we're building together." So let's start with the vision. What does a world of live free look like?
Mm.
Paint us a picture.
A world of live free means that we are free from all forms of violence, free from all forms of oppression, free from all forms of degradation and inhumanity. To live free means that human flourishing can be a reality, and our theological traditions can be a catalyst, a persistent impulse towards such a vision. If it is indeed the case that religious fundamentalism that is fueled by hyper capitalistic and patriotic forces gets merged with our faith, then that becomes a heretical faith,
Mm,
right? And so to live free is to live free from oppressive, imperialistic expressions of faith as well, right? So it's about freedom. And, freedom comes with a responsibility, but it is about us making sure that, as our earliest iteration says, we are always alive and free. And that emerged out of our gun violence prevention work at its core.
I love that. And it's a beautiful picture, and it's one that propels us and motivates us to do the work. And
Yes.
so that asks the question then, how do we get there? And so tell us
Mm.
about the actions we can take through the Love Free initiative.
Yeah, the Love Free Initiative is an effort of thousands of people of faith, particularly in the Black church tradition, who are wanting to say in a time of religious fundamentalism, religious extremism, hate, division, we want to recapture and resurface love as a central ethic to defeat all of the, say, anti-Christian, anti-human efforts that are being cloaked in religious fanaticism or unfortunately versions of Christian authoritarianism. So Love Free allows us to resurface practices. All of us remember what it's like to get around a table at Big Mama's house or your grandparents' house after church on a Sunday and eat a great meal and hear each other's stories and laugh and lie and gossip and tease and just build community. Well, we want to bring that back and let soul food dinners or Sunday dinners be a gathering place to unite three particular populations: people in our churches that attend, oftentimes commuters, so may not be always connected to the neighbors around our church buildings, which are often situated in voter precincts that are likely not always engaged with enough time to be democratically participatory in the elections, and then our violence prevention practitioners who are often systems impacted people who are now waking up every day to interrupt gun violence and to provide healing support for people returning home from jail, prison, and custody. Imagine if church members, neighborhood residents, and peacemakers, violence interrupters, were all able to gather at least once a month for the next 6 months and learn stories, enter into training and boot camps together to hone our skills, to do organizing, base building, voter education, peacemaking, healing work, and then launch massive civic engagement campaigns that are not
Mm,
just about voter registration and voter turnout, but also accountability, co-governance with our elected officials to deliver the kinds of outcomes we say we want. So Love Free is an effort to start with the question, who do you love? Hopefully you love the people you go to church with. Hopefully you love your family members. Hopefully you love your neighborhoods. Hopefully you love the people who are systems impacted that are stone's throw from your church. Who do you love? Can we gather around food, love, training, relationships, practice, stewardship of our democracy? That is the hope, and we're trying to rally several 100,000 people to participate in signing up for these dinners, registering to vote, taking action to fight and defeat Christian authoritarianism in our lifetime. and have 1,000 outposts of faith congregations across the country to join in with us to do it. So you can go to livefreelovefree.com and sign up if you'd like to host a dinner, attend a boot camp, or join us as we knock doors and register people to vote. But it's an effort to center who do we love. And my prayer is that if no one is feeling loved, we who follow Jesus will be agents of giving free love to people in need.
Has the Love Free initiative already started? Do you have some of these things already going?
Yeah, we started signing folks up in February. We have about 150 signups so far between now and the end of the summer. I think this weekend there are love free dinners happening or Sunday dinners happening in, let me see, Detroit, Michigan, in Indiana, in Atlanta. Last week we had some in the Bay Area. The week before there were some in Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia. So they're starting to roll out. We would love for everyone to host one. You can host it in your home, and we'll send you a toolkit. Once you RSVP, you can host it in your church, and we invite churches to partner with other churches, so it's just not your own church. We're just trying to like rally people together. So super excited for the dozen or so that have happened. Looking forward to the many more that will happen. We'll have 12 boot camps, leadership training sessions between now and November. So it's all moving and rolling out, and super excited at the enthusiasm of so many of our Live Free and Black Church partners and others who are starting to sign up and join us.
For these dinners, have you heard back from anyone? Any notes from the field? How's it going?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard obviously that the crisis of just affording basic needs has created a huge strain on people. We've heard some harrowing stories from some of our young people, particularly young girls. We asked a few of them to share what are their biggest concerns, what keeps them up at night. And one of our young girls, I won't forget this, said, what keeps her up at night is figuring out how to walk to school the next day and not be kidnapped. I
Kidnap.
mean,
Wow.
kidnapped. I mean, our violence interrupters, we have some of our violence interrupters and peacemakers or sisters too. They rallied around this young sister to make sure she can get escorts to school. Our elders were talking about the challenges they're facing of feeling invisibilized, that, the older they're getting, because families have moved around the country. They're not always
Mm.
able to feel like they have a place to belong and be useful. And so we're hearing all kinds of stories that are informing how we need to reach our people in this time. Just last week, some folks expressed a lot of anxiety around the war in Iran. They have loved ones who are in the military service and got into it thinking that there would be no no more wars, and now they have loved ones who are on high alert. So I'm appreciating that it's giving us a chance to hear people's stories, and hear things that we otherwise may not hear if we had not slowed down enough to ask.
Mm.
And so, whether you participate in a Sunday dinner or a Love Free initiative, my hope is that all of us will start to slow down, get out of our bubbles a bit, and extend ourselves to one another. Love will defeat this hate, but we got to practice it,
Mm.
right? And we have to allow it to be a reciprocal, mutual engagement. My prayer is no theology we hold will silence the voice of the hurting that we hear when our hearts are open with love. And so it's a practice. It's a beautiful practice. People are both enthusiastic, sombered by it, but then feeling like we got to keep doing this to keep hearing and listening and sharing and eating and building intergenerational spaces together.
And that's livefreelovefree.com is where
Yes,
you
sir.
can go. I signed the pledge. I'm getting the emails. And so I plan to continue to take action with y'all. Last question, midterms coming up.
Mm.
in many ways, at least in my view, our perhaps last democratic chance
Yes.
interrupt this authoritarianism before a long, long time. You mentioned voter registration, voter turnout. What should people be doing as individuals and as the church to ensure the best possible democratic outcome in the midterms?
So the first thing you should do is oppose the SAVE Act. Like right now, the Senate and the House are trying to pass one of the most regressive voter actions since perhaps the signing of the Civil Rights Voter Rights Act. They're polling people saying 70-80% of even black folks are agreeing that you should have an ID when you vote. And even if that's true, let's say that everybody understands that bill, understands what's at stake. I would argue most people don't. 20% of the electorate being ineligible to vote betrays the one vote sensibility of our Constitution. It is a guaranteed right to vote. The mechanism they're putting in this SAVED Act is attempting to create what some would call a poll tax, meaning you would have to go secure a passport or some extra hoop to gain the ID needed to vote. It's important for all of us to know that there are uh, uh, these mechanisms not only already in place, but the numbered of voter fraud cases that are being identified do not warrant such an a far-reaching bill to solve. I think the Heritage Foundation said they found 8 incidences. Statistically, you're more likely to be struck by lightning twice in the same place than experience an act of voter fraud. So, oppose the SAVE Act. There's also within the SAVE Act this a provision where they will purge voters from voting rolls. So there's all kind of ugly things in the SAVE Act. We should defeat that. Full stop. We have a petition. You can go to our website and sign it, or find your favorite civil rights group. But just call your senator, call your congressperson, tell them we oppose the SAVE Act. Do not vote for it. The second thing we should do is recheck your voter registration. Make sure you are registered to vote. You can go to vote.org, enter in your name and information in a secure site, and they will literally not only tell you if you're registered to vote, but they'll give you all the information about your polling place, etc. Every church should have a voter registration team, a voter education seminar that you host, and we're glad to help support with that, and we should all help get people to the polls. So it starts now, though. Often, a lot of our civic engagement work goes later on in the cycle, and we usually run out of time. So to have the best possible midterm turnout, we need people to start paying attention to it now, start educating our folks now, making sure the SAVE Act does not pass. Some of the redistricting stuff that's happened has changed people's voting muscle memory. So just check every mechanism you need to, and then you help others check it. But to your right, this is an important moment. If we do not build the dam of hundreds of thousands or tens of millions of our people to get this Christian authoritarian leadership out of the White House and the Congress, then we are damning a next generation of our children and grandchildren to undoing what this generation failed to stop. And so I hope we take this moment seriously. If I told you you had 6 months to live, I hope you would live your life differently for the last 6 months you had on this earth than how you lived it the previous 6 months. Well, if I were to tell you we have 6 months to save whatever a semblance of this democracy we have, I hope we all would spend the next 6 months differently than we spent the 6 months previous. It is an act of stewardship, and I pray we rise to the occasion.
When you put it like that, 6 months, that hits like a punch to the solar plexus, and we need it. Now, we started out praising Ryan and Zinzi Kugler and giving them their flowers. I got to give you your flowers, Pastor Mike. You are a living, active embodiment of faith in action, of orthopraxis, theopraxis. I think you give hope and inspiration to a lot of people who question the church's role in fighting authoritarianism and working toward democracy, you're someone who I say, well, look at someone like Pastor Mike.
Hmm.
Look at Live Free, look at Love Free, and instead of just criticizing from the sidelines, understand that there have always been people of faith involved in this struggle. And here is an example of how you can get involved too. So we thank you for your witness. We thank you for all your courage and sacrifice in this struggle. And I thank you for joining us on the Justice Briefing. We will catch you on the next episode.